This tutorial will help you with section 1, cells and organelles. In the first question here, there's a diagram of an animal cell. We know that it's an animal cell because it's round. And the first thing we want to be able to do is be sure that we can identify these four structures that are indicated by 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so 1 is pointing at the mitochondria here, and 2 is pointing at those little dots, which are all over the place here. And so 2 is referring to the ribosomes. 3 is the very outside of the cell. And since we are dealing with an animal cell, there is no cell wall. So number 3 is pointing at the plasma membrane. Number 4 is, of course, the nucleus, where this material inside would be DNA. And so now that we know what all of those structures are, we also need to know what they do. So structure 1 is the mitochondria and goes through cellular respiration to make energy for the cell. Structure 2, the ribosomes, which goes through protein synthesis. Structure 3 is the plasma membrane, which allows things to enter and leave the cell. And then structure 4, the nucleus, which houses the DNA as indicated. So the next few questions have the same diagram. So we're just going to run through these and make sure you guys understand how to answer these questions. So question 1 says, in this diagram represents a cell. Which organelle is the site where amino acids are synthesized into proteins? So again, that is number 2, which is referring to the ribosomes. Next question. The diagram represents a cell. Which organelle is the site of cellular respiration? So that would be structure number 1, because that is referring to the mitochondria. Next question. Which structure controls what enters and leaves the cell? That would be structure 3, because structure 3 is the plasma membrane, and that is its job, is to control what enters and leaves the cell. And then another question with this diagram, which structure contains the genetic material of the cell? And that would be structure 4, because structure 4 is referring to the nucleus. Number 5, a scientist treats a cell with a chemical that destroys the ribosomes. As a result, which process will be stopped? So again, we're destroying the ribosomes. So if we do that, then that means that the cell will no longer be able to undergo protein synthesis. Number 6, a scientist treats a cell with a chemical that destroys the mitochondria. Which process will be stopped? Since the mitochondria goes through respiration, then respiration would be stopped if the mitochondria is destroyed. Next question. A scientist treats a cell with a chemical that destroys the plasma membrane. Which cell process would be stopped? So in this case, that would be osmosis. Other answers could have included cellular transport, which osmosis is a part of that. So keep in mind that's what the plasma membrane does, is it controls what enters and leaves the cell and helps the cell to maintain homeostasis. Number 8 here, if the chemical that's added to the cell destroys the chloroplast, the process that would be stopped there would be photosynthesis. Number 9, which type of organisms developed first due to early environmental conditions on Earth? So this is a cell question and also an evolution question. And so if we're looking at things in terms of evolution, we tend to think about the more simple organisms coming first. And so in this particular question, we could go ahead and eliminate our eukaryotic answer choices, because eukaryotic cells came after prokaryotic cells and are more complex. So we know that it's either one of these two that contain prokaryotic, and one of them indicates an aerobic environment, which means that oxygen was present, and the other indicates a anaerobic environment where no oxygen is present. And so we're asking about the first cells to develop. And Earth's early atmosphere did not have any oxygen gas. So the first types of cells were prokaryotic and anaerobic. Number 10, what is the function of a group of cells that contain a high number of chloroplasts? Again, knowing that chloroplasts go through photosynthesis, then that would be those cells function. Number 11, which is the most likely function of a group of cells that contain a high number of mitochondria? Again, this is knowing what the mitochondria do. They go through cellular respiration to make energy for the cell. So respiration would be our correct answer choice here. Number 12, which is the most likely function of a group of cells that contain a high number of ribosomes. So again, some repetition here, but ribosomes always go through protein synthesis. So if a cell has a large number of those organelles, then they're going to go through a lot of protein synthesis. Number 13, what is the function of a large vacuole in a plant cell? And so that would be storage, or more specifically, storage of water. And then again, sometimes this is called the large central vacuole. So just to add that extra terminology if you were to see it represented that way. Number 14, what will most likely be the result if all the mitochondria are removed from a plant cell? So here we've got to be pretty careful because they threw in plant cell terminology. And so what a lot of folks do is since that's the last thing that they read, then they will focus in on that. But we can't really do that because it's not asking about a plant. It's asking about a plant cell, but it doesn't, it's not within that context necessarily, because it's asking what would happen to a plant cell or an animal cell or any cell if the mitochondria are removed. So again, we have to focus on what the function of the mitochondria is, and that function is respiration. So it won't be able to carry out respiration. Again, since students read plant cell last, a lot of times they will pick, it will be unable to photosynthesize, which is not the correct answer for this question. That is actually the distractor. Question number 15. So just like we saw several questions with an animal cell, we're going to see several questions with a plant cell. We know that this is a plant cell because it has that square shape. And also, if we look at the outside perimeter here, we can see that there is a cell wall. And then inside of that cell wall, we also have a plasma membrane. And so question 15 asks, which structure is found in a plant cell but is absent in an animal cell? So number one is the mitochondria. Just like we saw in the animal cell, we can recognize that structure. It has a lot of surface area there with that inner membrane. And then two is that large central vacuole that we were just mentioning can store water for the plant. Three is the nucleus, just like it was present in the animal cell, because plants and animals are both eukaryotic cells. But structure four is the chloroplast. And so we can recognize the chloroplast and differentiate it from the mitochondria because the chloroplast is disc shaped. And then within that disc, we have stacks of discs. And so it looks a little bit different. And we can compare those two structures side by side right there where number one is labeled. And so the only structure here that is present in a plant but absent in an animal is structure four. Animal cells never have a chloroplast. The distractor here, structure number two. Animal cells can have a vacuole. If they do have a vacuole, it's much smaller compared to plant cell vacuoles. So number two is the distractor here. Number four is the only structure that plant cells have that animal cells never do. Number 16, which structure is the site of respiration? Again, that does not change from one cell to another that have mitochondria. So structure one is the site of cellular respiration. Number 17, which structure is the site of photosynthesis? So we identified that earlier as the chloroplast, which is also the structure that plants have that animal cells do not. Number 18, which represents the large central vacuole? That would be structure number two. Again, the largest organelle in the plant cell is that large central vacuole used to store water. Number 19. So this question is wanting you to compare how pro and eukaryotic cells are similar. And so we kind of go through these and we'll eliminate some of these answer choices. Both contain a nucleus. That is incorrect. I'm going to go ahead and strike that one. So eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. Prokaryotic cells do not. And that is actually the main difference between those two types of cells. There are other differences, but that's the main distinguishing factor, is that eukaryotic cells have a nucleus and prokaryotic cells do not. Both contain ribosomes. And so if you remember a few things from cells, which was a really long time ago, all cells have DNA, all cells have a plasma membrane, all cells have cytoplasm, which is just the fluid inside the cell, and all cells have ribosomes. So all cells have those items right there. When we look at C here, or what would be C, both contain membrane-bound organelles. That's not true. Again, only eukaryotic cells have a nucleus, and eukaryotic cells have membrane-bound organelles. And when we talk about membrane-bound organelles, we're talking about organelles inside the cell that actually have a membrane around them. So that would include the nucleus, mitochondria, chloroplast, vacuole, those sorts of things. And then down here, both contain cell walls. So prokaryotic cells do contain cell walls, but not all eukaryotic cells do. So those diagrams that we just looked at, plant cells do have a cell wall and animal cells do not. So we can't just make that blanket statement that both contain cell walls, but both do have ribosomes, as indicated up here by what would be answer choice B. Number 20, we've got a diagram here that is showing two protists, and one is the euglena. Here on the left is the euglena, and on the right is the paramecium. And then it's asking about structures X and structure Y, and asking what they do for the cell. So structure X, that is the flagella. Structure Y is the cilia, and both of those are used for movement. And we also established that we can fancy up that word a little bit. In biology, and locomotion is also the word for movement. Okay. Number 21. Which is the primary function of a vacuole in a cell? So again, whether it's a plant cell or an animal cell, that function is going to be storage. 22, plant cells are able to produce their own food. This process happens in which structure? So again, the chloroplast, that's where photosynthesis occurs. That's what makes plants autotrophic, is the ability to produce their own food. 23, these diagrams show a variety of cells from the same organism. How can cells from the same organism have such different shapes and functions? So we have here a neuron, or a nerve cell. We have red blood cells, and we have smooth muscle cells. And so all of these are in your body as well. And so as we get through these answer choices, we want to be sure that you understand how within your body these cells can have the same DNA but look very different and perform different functions. And this is a process called cell differentiation, which equals what we call cell specialization. So these cells differentiate during development in multicellular organisms. And so let's look at these answer choices. As each cell differentiates, the DNA changes so that each type of cell has different DNA. That is incorrect. The DNA is not different. The DNA is the same in all of these cells because they come from the same organism. Answer choice B, mutations in the cell's nuclei lead to new combinations of DNA. Again, that's incorrect because They come from the same organism, which means they have the same DNA. Look at answer choice C. During differentiation, different parts of the DNA in each type of cell are activated, resulting in the different structure and function of cells. That is absolutely the correct answer. So notice it didn't say that the DNA changes. It says different parts of the DNA are activated, and that's how we get cell differentiation, which leads to cell specialization. Let's look at the last answer choice just to be sure we understand why it's incorrect. During differentiation, different types of cells produce proteins which destroy the non-active DNA, leading to cell specialization. Again, we don't want to destroy any of the DNA, because even if it's non-active, that doesn't mean it's unimportant. So again, different parts of the DNA are activated, resulting in cell differentiation. Number 24. What do both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells contain? So we made that list earlier of things that all cells have, and cytoplasm fell within that category. Again, a nucleus, those are eukaryotes, not prokaryotes. Membrane-bound organelles, same thing. Those are eukaryotes. And we're talking about the nucleus, mitochondria, chloroplast, and vacuoles. And then linear chromosomes are also eukaryotes, because prokaryotes have circular chromosomes. So the only item here that both contain is the cytoplasm. Question 25. Which one of these cells is specialized to transport oxygen in the human body? That would be your red blood cells. Again, those disc-shaped cells that are concave in the center, those are representing red blood cells. They have the protein hemoglobin, which allows them to transport oxygen. 26. Which one is specialized to transmit electrical signals? That would be this guy here, your neuron, or what is referred to sometimes as a nerve cell. 27. Which type of cell is specialized for movement? That would be your muscle cell. And you can recognize muscle cells because they have these striations, and then they have they're multinucleated, which means you can see several different nuclei within the cell. So you've got striations, you've got multiple nuclei, you're dealing with a muscle cell. Last but not least, with these diagrams, which one of these cells in the human body is specialized for sexual reproduction? That would be option 3 here, which is the sperm cell. 29, looking at another protist diagram. This diagram shows a paramecium, which is a unicellular protist. When a chemical is added to the pond water in which the paramecium lives, it stops moving. Which structure is most likely affected? So again, number 1 is pointing to the cilia here. That would be the structure that would be affected if this guy stops moving. Number 30, this diagram shows the same unicellular protist, and then it's asking which structure represents the contractile vacuole and is responsible for osmoregulation. So we looked at vacuoles in plants, and we focused on that large central vacuole. And the large central vacuole in plants stores water. In paramecium, they have this structure represented by 2 here, known as a contractile vacuole. And that is the correct answer here, because the contractile vacuole expels water and prevents the cell from bursting. And so sometimes it looks like this, and then sometimes it will be kind of this star-shaped structure, and it will look like that. But you can see kind of the outline of it there. And so as water flows in to the cell, then the contractile vacuole squeezes and expels the water, preventing the cell from bursting.